My name is Zach Tidwell, and I'm a completely blind, self-taught indie game developer and founder of Dark Horse Game Studios. Today, I'm going to talk to you about developing in the dark, specifically what it's taken for me to become a developer without any sight whatsoever, and what that development process looks like. But I think the most important thing to touch on as we dive into this is to build a background getting into it. And so I wanted to share with you all a little bit about me. I actually grew up without any sort of programming background, and I wasn't blind either. I grew up in a military family and knew that I always wanted to join the military. And so I enlisted in the Marine Corps infantry straight out of high school. I served as a machine gunner for 4 years and deployed twice, but thankfully never saw combat. Despite that, as is so common with many that leave the service, I was still in a horrible spot by the time that I got out of the Marines in 2018. From a bad combination of head injuries, personal circumstances, and a real lack of healthy coping skills, I was headed down a bad path. I wasn't talking about what was bothering me, and instead I was self-medicating with alcohol and suffering in silence, as so many infantry Marines do. And despite the fact that I had my whole life ahead of me with a promising career and was pursuing a degree in nursing so I could become an ER nurse and help those around me when they needed it most, 9 months after I got out of the Marines, I'd reached the point where I didn't want to be here anymore. And so on March 31st, 2019, I held my concealed carry firearm between my eyes and I pulled the trigger. When I was taken off life support sometime later, I awoke to find that not only was I still alive, but I was now completely blind and deaf in one ear. I needed facial reconstruction surgery to piece my skull back together, and I had to relearn how to do everything. From brushing my teeth and sitting up in bed, to feeding myself, to taking care of myself in the bathroom. I had to do it all. And I thought that I was going to be relegated to living with my parents or in a nursing home for the rest of my life. And that didn't sit right with me. So I started chasing my independence. 8.5 months after I shot myself, I was snowboarding in the Rocky Mountains. A month after that, I was back in college pursuing a clinical psychology degree so that I could turn my mistakes into something that could help others. 6 months after that, I was living back out on my own, and things were just moving forward. One thing after another, I was checking them off the list and getting back to my new normal. That all lasted and was going fine for about 1.5 years until I reached my first math class, which is notoriously difficult for both blind people and Marines. But in particular, this was a huge issue for me because I took this class over a summer semester. So my school's disability resource center was short staffed and ultimately dropped the ball on making all of my course content accessible. I couldn't read my textbooks, I couldn't do my homework, and I couldn't take tests on my own. So instead they assigned someone to be my eyeballs. She would read everything to me and be a human screen reader and input everything into the computer while I did my calculations on a talking scientific calculator. I do want to reiterate that I hate math. And so once again, I was at this point where I was a little pissed off by my situation. By this point in time, I was skiing, whitewater kayaking, I was rock climbing, I was competing in Brazilian jiu-jitsu against anyone without this or anyone with disabilities, excuse me. And there was this weird point in time where unfortunately I could still pay my mortgage bill by myself, but I couldn't do my math homework. And that pissed me off. So I started researching what caused these disconnects in the accessibility. Why could my screen reader do some things and not others? And why was I dependent on other people for having access to the digital world when I could do so much in the physical world? When I found out that it came down to the code of each app or website that I was trying to access, I decided that I was going to do something about it. So in October of 2021, I dropped out of college, and like a rational thinking person does, I decided I was going to teach myself how to code so I could have a positive impact on the world. I had this almost sobering realization after I had made this huge move and set out on this endeavor that hey, the accessibility issues aren't going to stop in college just because I drop out and decide that I'm going to start Googling how to code and all the tools that I need to code. the accessibility issues are just as prevalent. So I spent months and months trying to find accessible articles that I could use, or tutorials I could follow, or editors that I could use, and I wasn't having any luck. Thankfully, The Last of Us Part 2 had come out around the same time that I lost my sight, and so I had this bright idea. I figured if Naughty Dog was able to do what they were able to do with that game and make it accessible to everyone, then they must have been doing that with accessible tools. And so Dark Horse Game Studios was born. I was shifting my energy, and now I was going to create accessible games first and then move into the bigger picture stuff. And that sentiment lasted for about 30 seconds. Because as soon as I had the wise idea to start looking into Unity and Unreal, I realized that those tools are even more inaccessible than the normal editors. Not only do these industry leading tools, they're not accessible for disabled developers, but they also don't natively output accessible interface elements. And so I started back from square one and started reaching into any possible tools that I could, and I found the same conclusion. And so I ended up having to take a step back. I taught myself how to use yet another screen reading software so that I could develop on a Mac, and I finally found something that would both allow me to create accessible content and that I could use on my own without having to have someone to be my eyeballs. And so as I stepped into this process, I set out to create my first accessible game. It wasn't going to be a video game because that was physically impossible at the time. So I designed a native iOS game called Xanagrams. It looks and functions normally for anyone without disabilities, but what's so special about it is that it's accessible to the entire range of visual impairments, from color blindness all the way down to total blindness. If you're blind and completely deaf, it actually outputs to refreshable braille displays. So those players can also access what I create. And even if players have mobility limitations or missing upper limbs, they can play Xanagrams with their voice. And now you're probably wondering, that's all great, but how are you actually coding? And it's in a bit of a backwards manner. So I have my tools locked down at this point, and as I'm building out my code base, I actually go about it in a rather backwards manner as opposed to what sighted developers would do. I'm building everything to be accessible out of the box. And this is one of the reasons that I say, this is my hot take for today, is that accessible design is it's a problem of design rather than implementation. So many companies are curious and always talk about how expensive and how much of a time suck it can be to try and make these things accessible. But if you set out from the very beginning with every member of your team, from audio to sound design to your level designers and your programmers and your animators, you can identify these issues along the way. And you can set out to, from the very beginning, design your data models in ways that can leave all of this critical information accessible to the players who need it most. And so what this looked like for me, just to try and give you guys a view from my perspective, I finally had my first version of the app running, and I thought I'd made it beautiful, even though I'd never seen a line of code in my life. And for the first year that Xanagrams was on the App Store, in which it won 2 Game of the Year awards from different accessibility-focused sites for its accessibility, I just recently found out that it was pretty hideous. And so I wanted to show you some examples and kind of talk through what this process looks like. If Jordan, my lovely assistant, I don't know where you went, but okay, if you would go ahead and bring up these screenshots. I just Everything that you see on the left is just showing the basic screens of Xanagrams. And I'd thought that I'd made this beautiful design where everything had a smoked glass finish to it and everything was real sleek looking. And then Jordan came to help me track down a bug one day. I knew something visually was appealing because there was some sort of infinite loop that was breaking my code. So I asked her to take a peek at it and basically tell me what was going wrong, but she ended up telling me everything that was ugly too. I love you. No, but, and she was like, "Hey, can you change the shape of the buttons?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've already taken care of that." And she's like, "No, but like, can you put a shape around them?" And I was like, "They have a shape around them." She said, no, they don't. I said, yes, they do. I wrote the code. It has, it's there. And she was like, well, I have the working eyeballs and there's no shape around the buttons. So everything that you're seeing on the left there is the design that I thought and actually had code in place that I thought was working. And everyone would tell me that it looked okay, and it turned out that it didn't. So we've redesigned it, but I just wanted to kind of talk through what that process looks like because it's Jordan has no background in programming. So when we're communicating these things, she tells me what doesn't look right or what could be better, and we're trying to communicate through non-coding terms and from converting from visual to non-visual what's going on. And it's just I like to throw that in there to say that if I can make my apps accessible to all of you who can see, I think you can take a little more consideration into making your games more accessible for those of us who can't. And I wanted to show a little bit of an example. And Mr. Sound Engineer, we're about to show a video. So please be ready to make adjustments as needed. But okay. Did I just turn this off? Hello. Oh, okay. So I'll describe what people are going to see for those of us who can't. We're going to show, and I want you to pay particular attention to what you're seeing versus what's being read. Ignore the fact that the screen reader is speaking super slow. That is something that I did to make this accessible to you. That is not how your blind players are going to listen to games. So also keep that in mind. But you'll see this is when you enter Xanagrams. A typical puzzle has 6 anagrams in it. You get on the upper portion of the screen, you'll see each of the hints for the anagrams, and next to them, there's a number that tells you how many letters apply to that answer. And we were originally going to do this in kind of showing a video and me talking a little bit more, but since that's not going to work, I'm going to explain everything else. Then I'm going to show you again, when it comes to the buttons that you see on screen, the remove last button, which is essentially a backspace, the shuffle and the hint buttons, you're going to hear more context being provided to my blind players. And then finally, you'll notice that in places where you don't see anything at all, I'm also conveying more context, specifically when it comes to the current spelling. Right now, you're seeing on the screen that says current spelling, but it's going to tell blind players that it's completely empty. And then even more importantly is that anytime that they need to hear the spelling of something or the letter groups that they're reading, it will say that letter by letter. And it's these little extra details that I've added that were so impactful for people. And so, Jordan, would you kind of click through those?
Tool used to listen to heartbeats, 11 letters. To utterly destroy or remove something, 10 letters. Tool used to listen to heartbeats, 11 letters. To utterly destroy or remove something, 10 letters. Remove last button. Removes the last letter group from your current spelling. Shuffle button. Rearranges letter groups. Hint button. Use one of your 10 hints. Remove last button. Removes the last letter group from your current spelling. Shuffle button. Your current spelling is empty. Your current spelling is empty. TAN button. LECO. Hit shut. Remove la. Your current spelling is TANLECO.
That was supposed to be about a 30-second scenario there that was just going to show some of the accessibility that's going on behind the scenes, because I think when I talk about that to people who can see, they don't necessarily recognize what's going on. And as you may have seen, when I press the different letter groups that are down at the bottom of the screen and they are visually disabled, there's basically a tertiary state there where they can be disabled. And then also, once a player has solved one of the anagrams, the letter groups become permanently disabled. And so visually they don't change, but they get hidden from the screen reader entirely, because for you to solve each puzzle, you have to use every letter group just once. Every letter group will get used. And again, this outputs to Braille for people who need it. This can be played by voice, and I apologize for us getting derailed a little bit. But as I mentioned, Xanagrams did go on to win two Game of the Year awards from accessibility focused sites for what it's done, and I'm continuing to try and work towards building this company so that I can, at least in the mobile world, hopefully one day when all of you wonderful teams in the audience put pressure on companies like Unity and Unreal to increase the accessibility of their platforms, that I'll be able to have a real development team and continue to lead the way in inclusive design. And so with that, to wrap things up, did wanted to reiterate, accessibility does not have to be scary. If you address these things from the very beginning, just like I have, the only thing that's going on there with all of this code and those announcements is I've designed my data models to leave the data that is needed to be conveyed to people who can't see, or to the software of people who use voice control to navigate, or people who use Braille, to for that data to be exposed to their access technologies. And I wanted to thank you all for listening to me today. I did want to mention that this is my first time doing this in a tech space. Typically, I'm more involved in the mental health space, but please go download Xanagrams and take a peek for yourself. Please contact me at my website at zachtidwell.net or on Twitter at zachctidwell if there's anything you think I could do better, or if I can help with anything else. I am writing a book about, there's a lot more to my story. I really dive into all the nastiness that led to it, all the mistakes that I made, and everything that I've done right since. And once again, thank you all for dealing with us during the tech issues here. But thanks.